Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Today we'll be focusing on the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, trying to get an understanding of where it stands in terms of the caseload of COVID-19 confirmed cases. And at the same time, also see what the situation is within India itself. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest today. We have first off Mr. Rajiv Desai, who is joining us from Delhi today. He's an analyst. Welcome back to Newswire, Mr. Desai. Let's first begin with the situation in India. Tell us a little about the caseload at the moment and the biggest challenges the government is facing in dealing with these.
Well, there's a couple of things that are very striking about this virus in India, the extent of the virus in India. It's not very, there's a stage where it came in from people who came in from abroad, and there was some question of whether there would be some community transmission, which means locally. It's not clear how much of the local transmission is begun or is even evident. But if that should happen, then there'll be problems. Meanwhile, they've taken the steps. Delhi and all the major cities are under a complete lockdown. I'm not sure about how well the doctors and the tests are faring, but from all I know, there's a lot of chaos there. That's true. There are a lot of people whose lives have been completely disrupted. I'm not talking, for me, I'm just sitting at home. But, the daily wage earners and so forth, small shops and establishments and what have you, their lives have been completely disrupted, overturned, and so forth. And you would expect, as Mrs. Sonia Gandhi of the Congress Party just released a press note saying that you should do something, government should do something, develop an economic relief package for these people who have been disrupted. In contrast, the finance minister just got done with a briefing, with a press conference, where she concentrated primarily on tax collections and tax collection deadlines, and on what's happening to companies in terms of regulatory filings and so forth, and tax filings. So
you're talking about it being politicized by political parties at this time of emergency, yes?
Well, I don't know whether political parties are doing it. I'm doing it. Fact is that that's hardly a handful of about 10, 12, 15 million people, maybe 20. And there's so many people who are just in a complete limbo. They have no idea what to do, where to go, who's going to help them.
Lack of directives, right? Lack of directives and a sort of a communication gap, it seems. Mr. Syed Tajamul Imran is a journalist. He is just joining us from Shopian in the Indian occupied Kashmir. Mr. Syed Tajamul was given me an idea of the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, because there has been a curfew, there have been communication blockades, there's been a complete internet blockade since August 5th, 2019.
As the world is already aware that since August 5th we are without internet, without other basic facilities as well. But due to the coronavirus, in the last week from the third week of March, we are getting more disturbed. We have some 93 less than 100 ventilators for some 70 lakh people in Kashmir. That is the biggest worrying factor. And with every passing day, we are getting a positive cases. Today, in the second half, we have got 2 more cases in Srinagar, the capital city of occupied Kashmir as well. And apart from that, there is lack of medicines as well. There is lack of other facilities as well. And if we see the Doctors Association, and if we see the statements which are coming from the Doctors Association as well, so they are saying that they are lacking the facilities which a doctor needs in all these circumstances.
Now, Mr. Tajamul, I understand that Ladakh has reported 13 cases. You're saying 2 more have emerged in Srinagar today. The total cases in Srinagar are now at 5?
I think if we say in the whole Jammu and Kashmir UT Union Territory, The total cases are now 7. There were only 1 cases in the city. Now today they have confirmed more 2 cases, one from Hyderpora, one from Naugam area. So the total cases in the city are 3, and in the rest of UT is 2. In the rest of UT is more 4. Total cases in J&K UT is till date 7.
Mr. Tajamul, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you here because I want to quote here Samia Rashid, who is the current principal of GMC hospital in Srinagar, and she has talked about while right now with the current caseload, the number of ventilators available is enough to handle the current caseload, but she's very apprehensive of how this is going to turn out in a few weeks.
In case we will see a hospital which is of such standard, we have only SIGMAs, Seri Kashmir Institute of Medical Science, Sora. But in the SIGMAs, we have only some 93 ventilators for 70 lakh people. So that is something disturbing. And they have managed a branch of the SIGMAs in the outskirts of Srinagar. But still, if we see whatsoever they have, it is not enough to defeat the crisis we are facing right now. It will create more problems in case we will get more such cases.
At this point, Mr. Tajamul, hang on. I want to come back to you to talk more about equipment. But first, Mr. Rajiv Desai, now a 2018 report, an audit in Jammu and Kashmir talked about that right now in the entire India, it is the state which has the lowest doctor to patient ratio. Not only that, but also the nurses to patient ratio. Has the central government announced any kind of incentive that they will be releasing funds or sending doctors to the besieged valley?
Well, the only thing they've released right now is Omar Abdullah. That's the big news from Kashmir today. And Mr. Abdullah came out and said that he would not discuss, he would discuss the terms of his incarceration over a period of days. But right now it's coronavirus and isolation is key. So he then didn't take any questions and walked away. And I think that's probably a good thing because isolation is important. Now, as to the specific incidences of this virus spread in Jammu and Kashmir and the availability of hospitals and doctors and equipment, I think it's pretty much the same all over India, except in some maybe not even in the capital city like Delhi. So I don't think in a normal circumstance.
According to this audit report, Mr. Desai, Kashmir right now has a ratio of 1 doctor to every 3,866 patients, which is much higher than what has been in this report quoted for other states all over India. The WHO standard, by the way, is 1 doctor to every 1,000 patients.
I appreciate it, but that's the way it is, and whether they can handle the virus as of now, luckily, from what I heard from the other gentleman, there are a few cases, 6 or 7 all over the state, and maybe it won't, mutate. But as of now, everywhere in India, there's a question. Questions are being raised on the ability of this government to handle it. And now this is just in terms of competence. We are not even talking about any other thing. India's public health infrastructure is notoriously poor. So, this is not a virus that is in the normal course of things. So the fact that it could be overwhelmed is there for everyone to see. If you had a normal government, reasonably competent, who could understand things, and whose leader does not exhort people to go out onto their balconies and beat thalis and stuff like that to chase away the virus, and then we might have had a shot at it. But as of now, I don't see a shot at it at all. And as I said, the finance minister came out. She had no idea of any relief packages for people whose lives have been disrupted. She only talked about tax deadlines and what was going to happen in the markets. So. These guys are completely out of it.
They're out of their depth once again. Now, Mr. Tajamul, there have been concerns raised by doctors too, have been reportedly been put in quarantine. Hundreds of people in Kashmir are already in quarantine. There are concerns that not having high-speed internet, even though internet has been restored, but not having 4G speed internet is creating a lot of problems. We've seen tweets, tweets reported in various news channels, in newspapers, of doctors in Srinagar saying they can't download manuals that will teach them how to deal with COVID in intensive care.
Exactly. I must first thank the other guest who is in the panel, as he categorically has said that the current government is not able to handle the crisis, which I second. There are other things, as you mentioned, that doctors have been asking that they are not able to download the guidelines which they have received, which they were supposed to receive from WHO and other health organizations worldwide. Yes, there are certain problems that as well. Apart from that, not only doctors are suffering, but those who have been asked to work from home, they too are not able to access the net, or they too are not able to do the other things because of the internet. Apart from that, as you said, there are thousands of boys who are studying or doing job outside state or outside country, if we say at India level. They have been called back, or they have been put in hotels apart from hospitals, because we don't have that much structure here. So the government have hired some hotels in which they have put the boys for precautionary measures.
One last question, we're running out of time. Quickly tell me, Kashmir has been in lockdown since August 5th, right? Movement of a normal life has been restricted largely. Is that not, in a strange irony, actually going to help in containing the spread?
Exactly, that is the concern as well. But what the biggest concern as of now we Kashmiris feel is that all those young boys, or all those who have been taken before 5th August by the Indian, they are all actually in different jails of India. So they are there, the families are worried here. We continuously, the activists from Kashmir are asking the Indian government to release those.
Their whereabouts, because it is a big concern that their entertainment could also be very vulnerable of the contagion. Thank you so much, Mr. Syed Tajamul, joining us. Coming back to you, Mr. Desai, on this very point, the Amnesty International, 170 academics from around the world have written to WHO, the UN Rapporteur, and like I mentioned, Amnesty International, they've all condemned the lockdown, the blockage of internet, not having high-speed internet. Has the government responded?
No, in fact, Mr. Abdullah, when he was released, that was the first thing he said. He says, open up 3G, 4G so we can connect with the rest of the country and be clued in as to how the epidemic is being handled. No, there's going to be no response. These people are flying by the seat of their pants. They don't know what's happening. And it's a really bad time for India to be saddled with a completely incompetent government like this in the midst of the world's worst health emergency. It's really, really, you should pray for us.
We absolutely do. You are constantly, everyone around the world is in our prayers, because the cases, the way they are increasing is very disturbing indeed. They have doubled in number in just the past 10 days. The deaths have grown threefold. Coming back to the situation in India itself, there were a lot of protests taking place against the Citizenship Act. They have been forcibly dispersed because of fear of spread, yes?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But I think perhaps while I have been a huge supporter of that protest, I think in the larger interests of actually the world and the pandemic, is just as well that they have dispersed. I hope that beyond a certain point, they can resume the protest.
On this question of the internet, coming back to that again, it also will hit the economy of Jammu and Kashmir pretty badly, because a lot of businesses, industries, they're asking their employees to work from home in these strange times. So that is something that again will not be possible in an economy that's been struggling.
Yes, I'm sorry to say that's the truth, it's really sad, especially in Kashmir, where already the situation has been rendered very difficult by some thoughtless and reckless acts on part of this government. And again, I want to repeat, I really don't see what they're going to do. I don't think they have the capacity
Mr. Desai, they released Umar Abdullah. What was the incentive behind that? I understand when they talk about countries around the world releasing prisoners. Iran released some 85,000 last week. But that was essentially so that the prisoners wouldn't be one of the sort of spreading the virus in close quarters. Umar Abdullah being released at this point, what message are they conveying?
Well, we've released your leader. I hope he can handle it for you. Whatever. I have no idea. If I start to anticipate and try and understand this government's moves, actions, and policies, I'll go crazy.
But within Delhi itself, in your neighborhood, in your whereabouts, are you seeing extraordinary measures being taken?
Yes, we're all locked down. We're all we can't go out. You can go out to get essential supplies like groceries, or if you need some medicine, or you need to go to the hospital. But by and large, everything is shut down. The metro is shut down, the buses, the taxis, everything is closed. The streets are deserted, and so that lockdown is the only thing that has been their only response so far. I have no idea of what they've done vis-a-vis procuring more equipment, testing equipment, treatment equipment for medical doctors and facilities in the country.
Mr. Zaffar Qureshi is just joining us from London. He's a Kashmiri analyst. Mr. Qureshi, there's been a lot of criticism on the Indian government not doing enough, not preparing the Kashmiris for what lies ahead.
Unfortunately, that is very true. I think even the criticism that the Indian government is facing is very low for what they're doing. So far, nothing has been done in Kashmir to ensure the safety of the lives of the people. There's a massive gap in the number of medical professionals available to treat such a huge crisis. Can you imagine, even the developed countries where the doctors are available are facing a challenge. Now in Kashmir, for every doctor has to look after 4,000 patients in the normal circumstances. But now with such a huge, massive pandemic happening, a global crisis taking place, the people of Kashmir have already been under lockdown for the last 7 months. They've already got they've got economical crisis that they've faced. They've got shortage of medicine, food, testing equipment. In the whole of Jammu and Kashmir, a territory that's been occupied with 14 million people, there's only one laboratory that is located in Jammu, Dr. Lalpat laboratory, that has been equipped to test. So one facility has to cope with testing around potentially 14 million people. There's a lack of PPP equipment. Only 3,500 PPP equipments have been delivered to Kashmir. Yes, there's a massive shortage of medical facilities. People have not been provided enough information. The curve on internet itself. There was a news article yesterday published where the doctors have said they're even unable to download the basic coronavirus manual which they need to follow. Now, the curtail on the internet, the 4G communication, is causing a massive gap. People are fearing that they're not being properly treated, they're not getting proper information on how to handle. There is not a proper isolation process for these people, or even the procedure hasn't been communicated to the people to say what they should do in case they find symptoms. There's a lack of medical facilities.
Thank you so much, Mr. Qureshi and Mr. Desai, for giving us your time here and your opinion on what is unfolding here in Jammu and Kashmir. And our prayers stay with all of those who are right now part of this horrible pandemic in these extraordinary times. Now we'll take a quick short break here. When we're back, we'll be taking a look at the situation evolving in Afghanistan. Welcome back to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. What we're looking to discuss today is that US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he was in Afghanistan on Monday in an attempt to reconcile differences between President Ghani and former Chief Executive Abdullah Abdullah. Now, a few weeks ago, Abdullah Abdullah swore in with a parallel government as president of Afghanistan because he contested the results, didn't accept Ghani's win. Now, there was no reconciliation achieved, and as a result, Mr. Pompeo said that the US was very disappointed. He said a lot more, a message he conveyed, which we will be discussing with our guest today. We have with us former ambassador from Istanbul right now, Mr. Mathew Bryza, joining us for this conversation. Welcome to Newswire once again. Mr. Bryza, the message that came out in this press statement by Mr. Pompeo, a lot of it seemed to be talking about disappointment that the US had and how they were looking to revise their relationship with Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's right. The tone of it for me as a former 23-year professional diplomat was unusual and frankly, I think a bit over the top. The statement seemed to be emotional and seemed to be couched in language that sounded almost like a viceroy who has decided that the Afghani parties have to come together and reach an agreement to enable U.S. military forces to withdraw. And I think, so that's the disappointment we're seeing, is that if Abdullah Abdullah and President Ghani cannot come together, bring their factions together, and then if President Ghani doesn't release the 5,000 prisoners that are part of that U.S.-Taliban deal, the whole deal unwinds. Now, if you're an Afghani leader, you might wonder, well, so what? I mean, we don't necessarily want the U.S. troops to leave, and the U.S. is in such a hurry to get out the door, so why should we be dictated to? So, yeah, this was a sign of deep, I think, personal frustration by Secretary Pompeo, using language that really, to me, it's certainly not the sort of language I would have used if I were to have written that statement.
It's interesting you pointed that out because the language did come across as a bit out there, considering that we've seen Zalmay Khalilzad begin negotiations with the US and the Taliban with a similar note, but he had to tone it down very quickly 2 years back almost.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that just reflects sort of the sickness that is the Washington bubble. I remember my time, like sitting in the White House situation room with some of the most powerful people in the world. Everybody in that room gets their adrenaline pumping, and they're aware of their power. And to a certain extent, they end up expecting other countries simply to fall into line. And one of my biggest criticisms of U.S. foreign policy throughout my career was that rather than sitting down, closing our eyes, thinking about what does it take to convince my partner or my opponent to do what I want to do, we instead very often conduct diplomacy sort of by, I used to call it trumpet blast. Like, the king has his band blow the trumpet and makes the pronouncement, and countries are supposed to fall into line. But I think in the case of this U.S.-Taliban agreement, we're seeing that the agreement is not rooted in an appreciation of the deep conflicts, not only between Abdullah Abdullah and President Ghani, but also just the conflicts among all the ethnic groupings all throughout Afghanistan, not to mention between the Taliban and the government.
Let me welcome here another voice that's just joining us, Mr. Pamir Patang. He's a political analyst and a former advisor to the Afghan government. He's joining us today from Kabul. Mr. Patang, when the U.S. Secretary of State comes out and says that the U.S. is very disappointed that this lack of reconciliation between Abdullah and Ghani is straining the U.S.-Afghanistan relationship. In fact, they've even announced that they will be reviewing the scope of their cooperation with Afghanistan. They're slashing assistance to the tune of $1 billion and maybe $1 billion more in 2021. What do you make of the wording, the language, the message they're conveying here?
Well, I think the Afghans have a completely different perception here on the ground in Afghanistan, and particularly in Kabul. They see this as a more of a U.S. blackmail against the Afghan people and the Afghan government, which is a democratically elected government. Of course, there were some issues with the results of the election, but they see as a direct interference of the U.S. government in the Afghan affairs. We had witnessed a similar case back in 2014 and 15 when Secretary of State John Kerry mediated some negotiations between Abdullah Abdullah and President Ghani. But this time, we had one of the elections that at the first round, President Ghani managed to secure over 50%. So the feelings on the ground is, of course, people are very upset, and they see that the U.S. Dealings with the Taliban, the peace agreement that was signed, where Afghan government was not involved until towards the late timing, basically when the agreement was about to be signed. So President Ghani today also appeared on the national TV live and assured the nation that they will find the $1 billion from somewhere and accommodate everything. But the general feeling is on the ground is that they see this as a pure and direct interference of the U.S. government. Either you do it our way or we are cutting our funding.
The ultimatum you're saying is coming across here. Mr. Bryza, they've also said, the U.S. has also said that they will not support or back any security operations that are politically motivated. What do they mean by this?
I mean, of course, the any security operations conducted by any part of the current Afghani government, that they're political in terms of their objectives. As we all know from basic international relations 101, war is the continuation or violence is the continuation of politics by other means. So that statement by the Secretary of State can only mean to me that he and the Trump administration are simply ignoring all the political differences between the various groups of Afghanistan, which the democratic process is supposed to help resolve, right? That's what democracy means. We have political differences. Through the course of an election, we come to some sort of a compromise and move forward. So to say, well, the parties should just put aside their political differences, to me, reflects not only maybe a deep misunderstanding of what's happening, but really a sense of not caring about Afghanistan's political future, maybe as a democracy, and just wanting to get the U.S. troops out of Afghanistan as quickly as possible, slam the door on the way out, and try to forget about what's happened.
Mr. Patang, the former president, Hamid Karzai, he's talked about making efforts to reconcile differences between these two, that is President Ghani and Mr. Abdullah. In fact, even the former Mujahideen leader, Abdul Rab Rasul Sayyaf, is trying to do the same. What are they trying to mediate? Are they trying to work towards a unity government like 2014?
I don't think that President Ghani is against an inclusive government. From the information I have, there was an offer on the table to Abdullah, offering him posts and offering his colleagues and his campaigners cabinet positions. I think what Abdullah was pushing for a change in the constitution, which is beyond the power of President Ghani. President Karzai and other political leaders on the ground, they have tried their best to bring the two sides together and to work on an exclusive government. But I think what President Ghani is facing is to bring changes to the constitution, which is beyond his power. That will have to be done or addressed at the lower jirga. So that's where the problem was, and I think that's where the disagreement took place last night.
And also, Mr. Patang, can you tell us a little about the meeting that is taking place on Sunday? As we understand, between Afghan government officials and the Taliban, there's been a video conference.
Well, from what the National Security Council of Afghanistan had announced was that there was a meeting that took place in Qatar, and the continuation of meetings should take place. But the actual content of the meetings was not revealed to the public yet.
Because we have seen tweets coming out from Suhail Shaheen, Taliban spokesperson, on Twitter. We've seen him talk about how he's had a meeting even with Mike Pompeo. Are you able to confirm any of those details?
Well, no one so far confirmed. The Afghan government has not confirmed whether the meeting that had taken place, what was the agenda of it, and the content of it was not released to the public. I think there are negotiations that are taking place. Some of the negotiations are taking place without the public knowledge. But so far, we are not aware of any other further meetings that are scheduled.
Okay, so Mr. Bryza, there is a big concern by others as well, other allies and coalition forces who are on the ground in Afghanistan, that this political chaos is going to essentially dismantle all efforts that have been made by the US and other countries to bring Taliban on board. Do you see that process stalling or falling apart?
Well, as our other guest was just saying, there is a process that's underway, and these constitutional questions can only be resolved by the Loya Jirga. That process needs to take place, and I a priori don't see any reason to prejudge that process will fail. I mean, of course, Afghanistan remains riven with political divisions. That's no news to anybody, and so. To me, it's really the job of the U.S. government to do everything possible to help the parties come together. And from the other perspective, to be fair to Washington, I mean, I do understand that Secretary Pompeo is trying to keep the pressure on. I do understand that President Trump and his electorate are tired of the U.S. being so deeply involved in Afghanistan. They know that the money, the $1 trillion in assistance over the course of the past decade and a half has largely been wasted. They know that corruption levels are so high. So I understand disappointment and impatience. But I don't see any reason why we would prejudge that the political process in Afghanistan is doomed to fail and that everything's going to unravel. I think now is the time more than ever that the Afghani parties really need strong support from the international community.
And will that international community step up, Mr. Patang? Do you feel like they are invested, especially considering that the entire sort of dynamics of world politics have taken a huge U-turn in a way because of the pandemic that's taken a top priority? Maybe now the Taliban and Afghan government future has taken a back seat for them.
Well, the regional politics is, of course, shifting a little bit. If we had this particular issue, let's say like 6 months ago, the regional countries would have used this opportunity to against the Afghan government, particularly Iran and some other neighboring countries. Iran have not yet recognized the election results of Afghanistan. They have neither congratulated President Ghani nor Abdullah. But this issue of coronavirus have shifted the regional politics, well, particularly of our neighboring countries. Of course, the support of the international community is key. I agree with the ambassador. Afghanistan needs the support of the international community like never before today. But cutting funds, Afghan government is fighting at the front line most of the insurgent groups in the region. And this doesn't really help the Afghan National Defense Security Forces to hear that the main ally, the U.S., is sort of turning their back on them. If you don't agree to our terms and conditions, then we are cutting the funds. I mean, we've been watching the Afghan media and following the social media as well. Things don't look good. I mean, people are a bit angry.
They are taking this as an ultimatum and reacting as would be expected by any nation. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Mr. Pamir Patang and Mr. Mathew Bryza, thank you for taking out the time to speak to us here on Newsfire. Well, a big message to all of you out there. Stay safe and stay healthy. We will be seeing you tomorrow with another episode, more news and analysis. Till then, goodbye.